Welcome to Into the Forge, the Lemnos podcast talking with hardware entrepreneurs about the journey, tools, and lessons that have shaped their startup and product. In this episode, I'll be talking with Matt, Jason, and Kevin, the co-founders of Marble. Marble is a leader in the automation of last-mile logistics, and the robots have already made deliveries to happy customers in San Francisco. Welcome, guys. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm Matt Delaney, one of the co-founders of Marble and CEO, and have the distinction of the largest commit file in our GitHub repo. Right? Correct?
You might have thrown a flag right there.
I'm not monitoring you. I'm Kevin Peterson. I'm the software lead here, so I have the distinction of preventing Matt from checking in gigantic files.
I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders here. I lead hardware. I don't have a distinction.
Yeah, because your shiny pants are gone.
All right, now, do we have to describe the shiny pants, or can we leave that as an illusion for the future?
I think it might be coming back. I've heard some rumors.
Okay.
Neither confirm nor deny.
All right. So you guys are the founders of Marble. Why did you start a hardware company, and why did you start Marble? Like hardware in general, but talk to me about Marble.
It wasn't about hardware, it was about robotics.
Okay.
And it was about realizing that robotics is finally taking off in the ability to actually start a company to build robots to solve real problems. You know, it's kind of something where the feeling was, 10 years ago when we were at CMU, that build these robots, they're amazing, but they were just millions of dollars essentially, right? And now we live in a world where all these trends have converged to make building complex mobile robots that can solve interesting tasks for humanity something that's finally feasible. And so that was kind of the genesis of why start a robotics company, is because now is the time where it finally lines up to really solve problems for humanity as opposed to making one-offs for an academic project or something.
So how did you, I think all of you had a perspective on this is, you're saying it was the right time. Like, why is this the right time around robotics? What's changed since you've all been engaged in it in different ways and have different perspectives on it? What made this the right time?
I think there are a number of things that converge to make now an ideal time for robotics. First of all, we've seen dramatic reductions in the cost of specific pieces of hardware like LiDAR, cameras, things like that. When I started working on robotics, cameras that we used cost $10,000 and they were terrible. They couldn't see anything. We now have cameras that have twice the dynamic range. You can point a camera straight at the sun and still see the road in front of you. That's incredible. You can buy those for $10. So our ability to build systems that have all these complex inputs is much, much higher. We can build something for a few $1,000s that used to be millions of dollars. So that's hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the software side, we've really seen a revolution, and part of that is around machine learning and how we do computer vision, how we stitch everything together to understand what the scene is around us. In the last couple of years, we've seen computer algorithms outpace human ability to detect particular objects in a scene. And so you can imagine how that translates into what a robot can do. So you put those two things together, and now we have the ability to see the world around us and build something that's cheap enough that you can use it in a consumer setting. And suddenly you have a brain that you can build for almost any task. So the question in front of us isn't, should we do robotics and is it applicable? It's what are the problems that we want to unlock? What are the hugest problems, the largest problems in front of society right now for us to solve?
Gotcha. How did you, and I think it's a perfect segue, you said, hey, what we saw, it was the perfect time to come into robotics. From there, you end up at Marble. And so there's some sort of, robotics wide open. I could do so many things with it. How did you sort of think about the reduction? And almost I'm as interested in the process of reducing as much as the final answer. Like as a founder, how do you decide what to build?
I think to some degree you follow what you know.
Mm-hmm.
My own history, Kevin and I had worked together on moon landing, and that was a pretty wild version of transportation robotics. The next chapter for me was Matternet, working on drones for transportation. So at least transportation was a theme in my own life. And the thing that if you look at the applications for robots and what robots are doing today, you'll find them probably in clusters of inspection, so for drones, for photography, and then doing some analysis on that data that's gathered to have insights from people, and also mobility for self-driving cars and like the ones that we're doing. So personally, I think that these are two areas where robots can be incredibly impactful today, and certainly as computer vision and perceptions continue to improve, I think we're going to see breakthroughs in applications for manipulation too, which is still a relatively difficult task today.
Right.
Just to add to that, I think there's, when you start a company, you don't necessarily land on exactly the right product the first time out of the gate, and that's something that people don't necessarily understand. You hear about pivots and people changing what they do, and that's a real part of how you innovate. It's not just on the software that you're writing or the specific piece of hardware that you're building. It's also in the concept of the business. So Marble started out originally looking at hotel robots, and that quickly changed over to looking at delivery, and we've gone through a bunch of different concepts there. So I think it's important to note that it's a process of discovery, and you don't know perfectly when you start out what the outcome's going to be.
We hear this a lot in talking with other founders that you hear this word pivot. It infers this like distinct activity, like there's nothing and then there's a pivot and then there's nothing again in terms of movement. And I think what you're saying, and we've heard other founders say, is like for the first amount of time, you feel like you're in perpetual motion, like it's almost dialing in, slowly drifting in on a target, where occasionally you have big jitters where you're like, okay, I need to move a bunch to restart that recentering process, but that it's far more gradual and far longer than a single pivot or even two pivots. Is that something you guys, it seems like, you've seen that a little bit as well, is that you're constantly learning about the market and what you want to build.
Yeah, it feels like constantly revectoring. Like we learn more and more, and then shift, and like the shift in the beginning from hotel robots to delivery robots was a pretty big shift. But then throughout that path, there was multiple shifts about, well, who do these robots make the most sense for, and exactly where should we start, and so on. And so kind of that like narrowing in that focus to eventually dial in on like, oh, there's the target, and there's where we can really, hit the market and really unleash this technology. So yeah, it feels like a constantly like swimming and shifting, right? Not necessarily any like super hard pivots where it's like we were left one day and then we're right the next day. Yeah.
But it also seems like it must be much more challenging because it's not a market at some level it's even defined yet. It's not like if I wanted to build an MP3 player, there's a tremendous amount of data out there of exactly what the customer wants and maybe what they don't have today. It's a known market. And it seems like in some of the areas that you're thinking about, potentially there's still unknowns. Like we're still building, the customer's still deciding what they want and maybe imagining what they could do, and that you have to intersect that. So it must be, more challenging there.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's the fundamental issue with any new product that doesn't. You look at MP3 players in the beginning.
Yeah.
What was an MP3 player? Actually, it was a handheld tape deck, and before that, the Walkman was the huge innovation, and of course, technology develops over time. And people then learn that running with your music would be great. And so maybe an MP3 player would be great, and then eventually maybe that MP3 player becomes a phone, and these things evolve over time. So I don't think there's any one concrete answer to that.
Gotcha. So, had you guys worked on hardware before? Like we always get this question from new entrepreneurs. They're like, man, maybe I worked in software, and some of them are like, yeah, I've been doing hardware since I was a little kid, and they feel like they're right, but we find everybody has a different story. How did you get to this junction on your voyage, like in terms of discovering that you like to work on hardware or the software associated with hardware, and how did you get here on your journey?
Well, each is independent, but I think
the
three of us were building stuff since we were a kid, pretty much. Yeah.
This one's a fun one for me. When I was 12, I built a Roomba before there was a Roomba out of Lego Mindstorms kit. That was really fun. I think that was my first experience in robotics. that was,
Did it work?
Did it clean well?
Yeah, it did work. I used Lego Mindstorms and Swiffer. I don't know if that product is still around, but
Oh yeah, you mean the little push
Yeah.
Swiffer thing? Yeah,
Yes.
I don't think Swiffer ever goes away.
yeah, that was pretty awesome. I took a product car, I put it back together, and I just kept doing more stuff like that. So I almost feel like I fell into it, but I was just pursuing something I loved.
Yep.
Yeah, the same kind of thing. A Mindstorms kid built an electric fish food feeder thing so that my grandparents didn't have to come over and and like feed the fish while I was on vacation. And then, yeah, modding my go-karts and go-peds. If you remember those upright scooters.
No.
It's kind of like on the hardware. Like we end up like souping it up, and it's a weed whacker engine on the back. And it's
Oh,
like a
those
direct
things. Okay.
drivetrain with a non-pneumatic wheel. It's like spinning in the back.
Right.
End up clocking out at 52 miles an hour in front of my house down like a hill. Definitely not safe, but it's like a fascination to like, can I make it go faster? Can I make it do this? Can I make it whatever? From kind of trying to code a stupid thing to drop food in for the fish to the modding my Civic to go faster and that stupid scooter, and then eventually finding my way into engineering and CMU and working on robots.
I've built hardware for a long time. My dad is a physicist, so I used to work on his telescopes. In high school, I built boards, amplifiers, and stuff like that for his telescopes. And then when I got into college, it was all mostly computer vision, but making RC cars drive on their own, and then that transitioned over to building self-driving cars for CMU,
Right.
and then from there, spaceships with Jason, and so that was a long history of hardware before Marvel.
Well, it seems like you guys had the opportunity both in your collegiate career, like you were we talked about like this is the right time for robotics. It seems like maybe you guys have a unique perception because you all went, from a schooling perspective, like if you look back at PCs, like there was a unique time where like Bill Gates, everyone will tell you, Bill Gates, a number of other folks will tell you, I guess that's my generation, like we had access to computers just at this really interesting time, and they were the nerdy thing not many people had, but we got to jump on the game, right? We just knew, and the game grew around us. And it seems like for you guys, like you might have been like amazingly at this junction, like if for people who were going to end up in robotics, like you were at the perfect place, potentially at the perfect time. I mean, do you feel a sense of that?
I think CMU when we were there was just an incredible place to be. From self-driving cars to drones to things that drove underground, spaceships, Mars rovers, everything was there.
Yeah.
And we all benefited from working with Red Whitaker, who has a class where when I took the class, we built Sandstorm, which was one of the first self-driving cars, and that was like 3 semesters of coursework.
Yeah.
You just don't. Certainly at the time, you didn't get that. That
Especially
was,
in like an undergraduate, like to actually like enroll undergraduates into those kind of things.
Yeah.
Like it seems like few schools that really foster a whole like
Yeah.
grad and undergrad kind of experience to like get everything together.
So I think we had resources. The first LiDAR was built in Red's lab before I was there, but it was built in Red's lab. That was a Regal, and so the people that knew how to process LiDAR and do computer vision were there and nowhere else. Yeah, so we got, I hate to use the word lucky, but we were in a great place.
Right place, right time. It's a story you hear a lot in the Silicon Valley, but I think in this particular case, like it's about a certain university and others. I mean, there were other universities,
Sure.
but only a few that sort of uniquely that you had a unique perspective on this coming into it. And it sounds like, again, and I'll wrap on it just because it's a fascinating thing. So after CMU, the things you work on, I would say, did you continue in hardware? Yeah, but you guys were at like sort of out at the edge doing amazing things. And then Matt, you had I don't know what the term for it is, like, you went and worked in software, and in particular at a relatively large company people
Well, I had
know.
a juncture because I was like going to go work on either continue to do robots stuff
Yep.
where like the options were kind of like stay in school or go to work for companies that, like, for example, like Volkswagen's like had a group kind of going on. It was But like 8 years ago, there wasn't like a lot of options.
Right.
So I was like, oh, go work at Apple in this incredible team and like learn how a big company works, because I really wanted to understand like the internals of the beast of like the best company at the time.
Right.
And so that was like the primary reason why I went and jumped over to Apple to work on something which was like totally out of my wheelhouse. I knew nothing about web browsers, and I started working on WebKit.
Okay.
And had to kind of learn everything, all the computer graphics on the fly. But it was, but it ended up teaching me a lot of the web technologies and so on that I think will actually like be incredibly valuable to like as toolkits to a lot of this world too. So it was like a nice well-rounding experience to kind of understand other areas of technology, and primarily, I mean, honestly, seeing that kind of company work from the insides was really a big learning lesson,
And the magnetic force that brought you back together. So it sounds like it's the intersection of sort of school and work, and when you work together. Founders often ask us, it's like, how do I find other co-founders? And I'm like, there's no like formula for it, but it just has to do with your networks in a lot of cases, like people And so I was interested, like, how did you three come together? Like, we often see pairs, and then the third. How did it work with you guys?
Jason and I were living together, and this is a much longer story, but basically I woke up one morning and I was like, now's the day to start the robot company. And then just bugged him, like, we need to go do this. And then we started talking about it, and then got really excited and started working on the hotel robot. And then in the midst of all that, as we were realizing like the much bigger problem to solve was this last mile delivery, that's when we're like, who else really needs to be involved in this? And so Jason wouldn't stop talking about Kevin. I knew Kevin back in school, and so then one thing led to another, and before we knew it, Kevin's on plane rides like every weekend coming out to work with us, and then it evolved into a three-party.
So when I visited the apartment, I think it must have been post-hotel robot then?
It was post-hotel robot.
It was like in the transition period. Yeah.
Damn, where's the hotel robot?
Oh, it's sitting below the stairs.
Okay.
You haven't seen it yet? I thought you saw that. It was sitting in the hotel.
I don't think I ever really had the context. Even if I looked at it, I'd be like, I'm not sure what I would have known that was the hotel robot. Okay.
We're saving that for like maybe 5-year anniversary.
Okay. So you're building your company, and again, entrepreneurs always ask us, we get this advice, you got to go get mentors, and you got to interact with peers, and then, there's incubators, and there's all these things and all these voices, and how do you decide like who you listen to? And it sounds like, even from your backgrounds, you have this great wealth of advisors and people who have done amazing things you can draw on, plus everything in the Silicon Valley. How do you process like who to listen to and who to bring into, those circles of varying levels of trust? I guess maybe on the outer ring, there's sort of, you can give me data, and on the inner ones are people, that you've worked with, and whose opinion you value. How do you do that? Because a lot of folks say it's just a cacophony of noise. Just so many people can give you an opinion, but you as the founder at the end of the day have to make the decision or the call. What do we do? How do you guys process that?
I think you basically said it, right? You should talk to as many people as you possibly can, but at the end of the day, you have to make your own decision. And decision making really comes down to experience, and a lot of times it's a little bit of analysis and a little bit of gut. And that gut's going to come from making mistakes and correcting those mistakes. But in terms of like picking the right people, I would say just always talk to the best people you can possibly talk to. Run with the most awesome crowd you can, and over time that's going to be where you find your co-founders. It's going to be where you find your mentors. If you're doing interesting things, people will come to you.
Have you found riffing off of this, founders often, or not founders, but people come up to me and go, oh, this is the most awesome person in the space. And I'm like, have you talked to them? They're like, no, they're so awesome. Like, how do you guys approach that? Like, there's somebody like in a field or an area, is it, did you have trepidation initially, still have trepidation, or more like just bang on the door and say, hey, I'm me and I need to talk to you?
Well, we have some examples of bang on the door. Like we went to ICRA, and then Wolfram Burgard, like one of the most famous professors in the field, was there, and we just like went up to chat with him, and like that chat was like, it's like, oh, I love what you're working on, and I'm also working on these pedestrian robots. You got to meet some of my like students, and then we flew over to Freiburg, and that's how we ended up ultimately meeting our mapping lead, Michael, was incredible, and it was kind of like we need to go here and like, who are the best damn people to talk to? Like, let's just go have a chat with them because we're working on something exciting and they're awesome, and let's have, you know.
I think the thing here to take away is that at the end of the day, we're all people, and you may be in love with a god, you know, but that's a person too, and there's a way to connect with a person.
Right.
And if you're mutually interested in the same thing, then that person's probably going to want to hear what you have to say.
Gotcha. As you've been going through the process of building your company, what have been sort of the tools that have helped you really build the product, things that have sort of outsized return? And when I say tool, I mean everything from a physical object to a process to a frame, mental framing. What are the things that you have found that uniquely helped you guys as you built Marble out?
I think probably the biggest killer of good ideas is thinking about things. The one thing that keeps moving everything forward is to just go do something, right? So if you sit around and you analyze how perfectly a wheel is going to turn, it doesn't mean the wheel is going to turn. But if you put a motor on a wheel and you turn it, the wheel turns. And taking a step and taking a step and taking a step, iterating, making mistakes and correcting those mistakes as quickly as you possibly can is a huge, huge tool that I've found to be incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
I think that the investment in an awesome recruiting process is something that's really undervalued. You aren't going to make your product; your people are, and it takes a while to accept that. But if you can really embrace that, and you come to see that the most impactful thing you need to do, and the most important thing is perhaps to just invest wholly in an awesome recruiting process. You have to own it.
So you're saying, and it's echoed so many times, that it's the people. It's all about the people. I mean, venture capitalists will say they invest in teams, and I think you're saying we invest in teams. Yeah, we invest in people in the team.
I'd say the word no is a really useful tool, right? Like, you say no to a lot of people that we interview,
Right.
like really keeping the bar high constantly for, how we use our time and like who we're a part of.
Do you think that extends to everything you do? Like, that's actually a really interesting phrase. I've often heard it said it's, the more difficult word to say is no than yes, but no's the more, of the two, it's actually more powerful. But, I think with
it's
recruiting.
Tricky, you also have to say yes to like opportunity sometimes. I mean, you have to be like open to learning in this world where you're charting into like unknown waters, but you also have to like say no to a million distractions and things that can like easily eat up your time. And, so it's like it really is a juggling act between using those two words for everything.
I think it's a process of yes and then no.
Okay.
Right? So
Yes until now.
yeah, if you say no to everything, then you're not going to learn about anything new, and you're gonna spend all that time thinking. You might have incredible people who are not culturally who you believe are going to be the solution to a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may go out looking for one type of person and find that you need another. You may go out thinking that your business should be A, and you get a little ways down and you find out that customers want B. But you wouldn't have found out about B if you hadn't tried A.
Right.
The trick is to be able to get started with A, walk down it a little ways, evaluate it, and then as quickly as possible, if B looks like it's going to be the right solution and you can do it, you should do B. But yes and then no.
I want to marry my next comment with something we were talking about previously. We were talking about the state of robotics, that this is the time of robotics, and you were saying, Kevin, you were just saying it's about this iterative process and knowing when to cut off a branch and say we've gone far enough, or hey, there's something close to it. When you look at robotics right now, and maybe in a general, maybe generally describing how you built Marble, how many times when you start down right now, even with where robotics is, how many times do you start down a path where you don't know necessarily that you're going to end up where you expected to be, or that you have a solution for it? And it's almost a question of like where we are in the revolution. Like, are we still in that phase where sometimes you grab a knife and you go into the forest and you you hack your way through and find out what's going on, and versus how many times you're like, look, this is a known problem with a known solution. We just have to execute really cleanly here.
Well, I think we're working on a problem that's technically very challenging, which is a little bit different than some business problems. You might have an interesting business innovation where you actually don't want to do any work on the tech. But I think when you have a hard technical problem, you actually have two parallel questions that you need to ask at the same time, and they need to inform each other. And one of those is, what are the business applications that I can do with the tech that I think is possible?
Right.
And then you're going to go and implement some pieces of that core technology. And as you move along, you're going to find out some of those are really hard, some of them are really easy, some of them are way easier than you thought they were. And that might change your opinion about what business applications work.
Right.
And so that's a process that feeds itself over time. And again, it's iterative, but you got to look at both sides.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. We were talking with Dave Merrill over at Elroy, and he one of their core philosophies, as an example, is they want to use off the shelf for almost everything. And so they knew going in, they had identified that in many of the areas there was an off the shelf thing. The unknown, it was right at the border between a known unknown and an unknown unknown, was that, when you take okay, I can go get an electric motor, but it looks like it's the part I need, but when I really interact with it, it's not. And then it explodes into this sort of interesting environment. So it seems like in a lot of areas, you'll find the pieces are almost the way you want them, but we're still iterating on a lot of these key components and building out sort of the depth of the options available to folks who are working in applied robotics. Is that something you guys have seen a little bit of as well, or is
Yeah, I think that's particularly a problem when you're buying things off the shelf, and of course we all buy something off the shelf.
Yeah.
One of the ones that we ran into recently is we figured out that our LiDAR jams our GPS.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I've actually seen this exact problem before, but you buy these things off the shelf and they interfere with each other, right? It's not even necessarily does this part do the thing that I expect it to do,
right.
But at the end of the day, you're gonna get parts as much as possible, but you're gonna modify those, right?
Right.
The best self-driving cars have computer boards that are built for that car. And you need to go from a scrappy state in the beginning where you don't have a ton of cash to do these things, to the point where you're really building everything yourself to have a nice integrated product.
And I'm gonna put a philosophy out in front of you guys, because I think you guys identify with it. But I think, interestingly enough, one of the most important traits for an entrepreneur is really that sort of technical and mental agility. I always think of like the great hardware founders are tactile. They like to build and touch, and then they're incredibly agile because the path in front of us, it seems to move and shape, and it seems like in your backgrounds, both from both an educational perspective, from what you do sort of post hours and while you're here, it's almost that agility has been and seems to be a really critical factor. Do you agree with that, or how do you see? Is it something you see and think about even during your recruiting process, or am I off? I could be totally off base, but
No, I absolutely totally agree with that. I think it's very tough to be successful in a startup with dogma, and really difficult.
That's interesting coming from you, Jason, because I think that you are an incredibly persistent person. Maybe not dogmatic, but you see things and you go after them and you work on them forever. And I think that that's an important aspect too, right? Like you have to have this belief that there's a thing ahead of you that nobody else has done and maybe nobody else could do.
See dead people, right? As
Yeah.
Ross would say.
Yeah.
Where no one else can see dead people.
That's right.
Okay. Crazy but calibrated.
okay.
And sometimes that's just an insight, but a lot of times that's just it's insight that you've built over your career. But a lot of times it's just I have no idea how somebody came up with Snapchat, right? But somebody was like, "This would be really fun. I'm going to do it," and they believed in it. And there's a lot of that. People are going to tell you that your idea is crazy, that it doesn't work, that you're dumb for walking away from your cushy Google job, and at the end of the day, you have to have that persistence, or you're going to be knocked off track.
What's been the most surprising thing about this process of bringing your idea to market? Like, what just, again, it was sort of the unknown, this thing that you're just like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that along this path.
I think one of the most surprising things that I've seen, like personally, is like in testing the robot out in the middle of the. So we built a lot of robots and tried them out in academia, like at a campus, like in a testing zone or whatever else. But actually putting robots out in the middle of the city is just fascinating to watch how a random person who never expected a robot to be there interacts with them. And like some of the interactions have been like people being, oh, hey robot, like let me help you along the sidewalk. And it's like, what? Like that was the first interaction. Like some woman at some point I thought she was escorting the robot like across the thing. So I'm delighted by some of the surprises that we get to witness, which are, I think a lot of humanity's first interactions with robots in everyday life. And like that's something that, in like history books, like it hasn't happened before, and it's like we get to like play with fresh minds right now, and in some way we feel also responsible to paint a good image of, because we view the future as robots positively impacting society in so many different ways, and so we want to make sure that we do a good job also of like creating those robots and the image around them that they're a really helpful thing. And so it's both like intellectually fascinating, has also twists and surprises, and it's something that's like really important to us to invest a lot in as well.
I think one of the most surprising things for me is how humbling it was going to be. And there are so many things that you'll have ideas about, you'll have assumptions, you may carry them as convictions, and I watched time and time again the world just kind of stand up to you and challenge you in ways that you didn't imagine. Maybe it's something really minor, something that's really major, but I think it's difficult for anyone to go through this process and not to be humbled by it. It's difficult, it's to be respected, but it's the stuff of life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sort of surprised me just in a really positive way is, again, what Matt, you were saying about how people react to the robot. Like it's one of the first times they've seen one in their normal lives just sort of it's not acting like them, but doing the same thing they're doing, just going down a street. I was with somebody today who had experience with your robot, and the thing that they harped on me for a while, it's sort of surprising, they're like, they have to make it learn how to talk to people, because this person evidently saw people walk up to your robot and talk to it and want to have a conversation with your robot where there's no context whether the robot would want to talk or not or anything, but they're like, this is the thing, it's going to have to talk to everybody because everyone wants to talk to it. And I was sitting there and my mind just sort of went pop for a second, because it was a vector about your robot that I had never thought of. And it goes back to that thing about people's this is so new that their expectations, how much they bring it into their personal life, but on the other hand, they're like, it's this blurry line between it being so personal and yet it being very different. Like it's a robot, but then people start talking to it like a person. Like their perception of this is surprising.
Yeah, they don't know how to interact with it. Yeah, like what is the definition? Yeah, like what's the standard?
We're at an absolutely incredible point in history. There are these moments where the entire world changes. It's like the steam engine revolutionized agriculture. You have the invention of the computer and maybe the cell phone and cars, and you look at these inventions and how they changed the world. The invention of the steam engine actually changed the political landscape of the world. It changed the world from a feudal system to what we have today. And I think robotics is actually going to have a similar kind of wild, unknown, unpredictable impact. So I'm consistently surprised by what those changes are and what the new applications are that we see every day. It's everything from, we do things like deliver food and packages, but as we move forward, as the population ages, we're going to see elder care, we're going to see the amplification of what people can do physically. So maybe that's digging holes, maybe it's building buildings, but this sort of multiplication of what we're going to do. Actually, I've been doing it for 15 years, and every single day it still just blows me away what we're starting to be able to do and what we're going to be able to do in 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think an interesting thing, and I'll go back to something you said at the very beginning, how you not only thought that this was the right time for robotics, but you said that you wanted, part of the the mission was to make the world a better place. And it's an interesting thing that, and we'd love to hear that statement, but how important is it? Because we are in this unique junction, and people, the reason it came to mind a little bit is, there's talk about robots and their impact on society, plus and minus, but it's amazing at just at a personal one-to-one interaction how many people walk up to your robots and you see smiles and you see there's a huge potential positive impact, not only in the way we the benefits that we could get from robots, but again, we tend to want to bond with them, and there's something really powerful, and so changing the world, I think, is not only you guys can do it in both ways. It's going to be an interesting job to have to shepherd, which is create those initial bonding relationships and then whatever function it does. But it's more than just the delivery. It's the interaction that you guys get to shape, and this is the first time so many people will get to see a robot and get to interact with it. So, I mean, it must be really cool.
Yeah. We have to talk about Easter eggs to add to the robot. Okay, all right. To members listening, just at some point say disco time to our robot.
All right, you heard it here. All right, so we've talked about some of the upsides and surprising in a good way, and I love it when we get to talk about surprising in a great way. Being a startup founder is always difficult, and I think when you do hardware, you've asked to add some extra degree of difficulty. In the voyage so far, what's been probably the most challenging part of being a hardware startup founder?
All of it?
I mean, distinct from there's all the things that go
Yeah.
along with leaving a stable job to start a company, or leaving the company you previously started to start another company. There's always risk associated with that. But I think unique to hardware, some of the challenges are things like you run into a lot of people who have done one or they've done the other. So there's people that understand firmware, there's people that understand how to build boards, there's people that understand how to make a web stack. But when you have a web stack that has to control a perception system, and that perception system has to drive the motors of
Safety
a robot.
issues, and we have to think about policy because
Yeah.
robot laws aren't written yet, and everything is multidisciplinary and so integrated.
And then you're doing that in a startup world. This concept of the lean, software as a service startup where you can just scale it infinitely is very different than what we do in hardware, right? Where there's a capital expenditure, it might cost you tens of thousands of dollars to do an experiment or more, and also time, right? Because you have to build a prototype, you have to build another prototype, and only after a few of those you're going to get it right. So the expectations, I think, both of employees who are working on problems, and they're going to have to learn how to deal with both sides, and then also on the investment side, and Lemnos has been really, really good about this, but the expectations of sort of speed to get something out to market are different with hardware than they are with software.
If you could take a time capsule, put a note in it, and send it to yourself back a year and a half, what would you tell yourself as a founder? Because I always ask this, what advice would you ask to other founders? But the interesting thing is, if I ask this question in a year, you'll have a different answer. So now I frame it as put a message to yourself and send it not all the way back. I'm not going to let you go too far back because then you're going to try to win the lottery or do something else interesting. But if you could get to yourself early on in the history of Marvel, what message would you send yourself in terms of being a founder?
Don't forget to exercise.
That's a good.
Seriously,
You're not the first person to say this.
I even read it a million times before going into it, but then have fallen in the trap of not working a little too hard, and then having to step back and be I need to take care of mind and body.
Right.
So my top basic advice, be damn important.
Just try more things, hire people faster.
Yeah.
Those are
Talk to me about the hiring thing really quickly, because it's there's no great answer to it. But you said hire more quickly, and at the same time we've talked about earlier, being able to say no and getting the right people and how those things battle. You want the right person and you want to wait, but
There's maybe a piece of advice that there's a few mantras that can come up. One's don't let perfect be the enemy of great. or there's different versions of it. But I think that kind of like falls into hiring a little bit too. Like,
Well, yeah, that, and I spent a lot of time at the beginning of Marble coding myself, and now looking back on it, most of that code is not being used. There's a couple things that are, but it's been replaced by really great people, and obviously you have to get to a demoable point, and so there's always this question of like, what do you do versus what do you get somebody else to do? But just getting more people on board, so you've got a better gang earlier.
And I think it binds all together, and you talked about, hey, it's the importance of recruiting. The recruiting engine is the biggest engine you're going to do, so it all fits together. But I love this phrase, and I really believe with you guys, it's like, you talk marbles filled with 11s, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, we want 11s. But again, that challenge of, all right, I'm staring at a 10.5 or a 9.5, and boy, oh boy, time is of the essence. Like that balance. Again, there's no, I don't know anyone who says they have the right answer to this clearly is probably overselling. But how did you guys think about that balance? Because hiring is not something that ever goes away. In fact, it starts to pile on, right? As the company matures and gets bigger, it's more people hiring more people. How has your thought process on hiring evolved in this initial window, and if so, how?
I think hiring is like one moment in the lifetime of finding a person, and there's really just a recruiting game that goes on all the time. And part of that's just volume, right? It's just how many people can you talk to, how many friends do you have, how many really incredible engineers do you know, and the other part of it is you don't know everybody in the world, and going out and finding as many people as possible and reading resumes, looking for people on LinkedIn, and doing that personally. I think in the beginning we didn't do as much of that. We've learned a lot about hiring. I guess that's probably coming through. But in the beginning, it was sort of like very, very super high touch, trying to talk to one person that we think is the perfect person, and then they would turn us down. And now we take really a much wider view. We try to find as many people that might fit the role, and then still try to have a high touch, but try to talk to as many people as possible.
This evolution is really a good one, because the things that work when you're 3 don't really work when you're 5, and there are different things at 10, and now we're coming up on 25, and we have to change all the time. So I think that the important perspective there is to product manage that, even for yourself. Let's say right now that you're considering starting a company. Do you have 5 people that you might consider doing that? And if you don't, what activities in your life are you doing to find who those people might be? And so you can think about this for every step of the recruiting process. When you're 3, it's like, okay, now we're looking for the next few people. Maybe it's a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, and a software engineer. Like, who do I know, and how would I go get these very specific people? And if it's just 3 people, that's fine. But when you're looking at growing 10 people, you need a very different strategy. So if you take this tactile sort of product management approach to an internal process like this, I find that naturally lends itself to improving it over time.
Gotcha. Why did you guys choose to work with Lemnos?
Because you're awesome.
Assuming I'm not awesome, let's go. No, I asked that question because it's if you look at you guys, you had pretty entrepreneurial backgrounds to begin with. You've done really interesting things. You had a sort of you knew how to do a lot of this, but you still chose to go to work inside of an environment. You could have probably kicked it off on your own. I mean, I saw it at the apartment to begin with, but I'm intrigued with that. Like, how do you make that type of decision? Like, what were you looking for, and what would you say to other entrepreneurs in terms of as they decide sort of, hey, where should I go? How do I move forward? How did you guys think about it?
I guess we were looking for, we needed to build stuff, and so we needed these hardware incubators, and we wanted to have a network of people around us that had done this before, and we had looked at the kind of options, and there was everything from kind of your very general YCs of the world to your more hardware specific ones. So we've gone through and kind of toured a bunch of them, and kind of weighed the options, and there was a combination of honestly walking through and meeting you guys and seeing how well you guys were working, and getting that vibe there with also the set of people that we met like down in the forge that were, you know, working on like just seeing that space and everything just kind of raw and open and everyone moving fast, and some of the conversations that we had, it felt like this is a place where we can really get moving fast on building the company. And looking back, I mean, having the support in the beginning when you're, you know, especially starting your first venture-backed company, I think like having the advisorship, like, is just incredibly important out the gate, right? And then also like having that network of people all solving similar things around you, just so valuable, because you can just save so much time where you're like, I mean, there's the normal startup things like, how do I form the company, or like what are these, you know, like forms of investment or whatever else you can maybe ask from kind of like anyone that's in startups, but then talking to people who actually dealt with like hardware problems, like, hey, where are you guys getting boards made, or like, where are you fabbing whatever, like all those kinds of questions, like soup to nuts across the board. Just having a set of people you can blast an email to or just walk across the lane to when it's just a few of you is just so much more valuable than like a few people with some money in their garage kind of off on an island. Having that network support is great. So.
I also think that one of your roles as a founder is to constantly be on a mission to convert people into believers. Maybe it begins with your spouse. As the
I know it does.
And then maybe it extends to a friend and to a recruit and to a prospective investor. But at Lemnos, we found believers, and that was inspiring.
And I gotta say, Lemnos feels like a hardware shop. You know, I've spent my life in, you know, everything from physics shops to robots to, you know, the shop at South Pole, crazy places. And Lemnos has that feel. You walk in and there's a gigantic vehicle, and there's something sewing, you know, next generation materials, and there's a robot driving around, and you just don't see that everywhere. You know, it's got that garage shop. This is going to be the next generation, super high tech, but still so scrappy. And there's real magic in that.
Gotcha. So my last question is, and I'm going to take us back to a piece of advice you said, which is sort of work-life balance, right? Every founder tries to create the mythical 25th hour. But when you guys go home, how do you think about that? You know, everyone wants to have balance, but how do you guys find it yourselves? Because everybody finds it a different way. How do you guys find it? And then how has your definition of that changed as you've gone through Marble? Like, you started probably thinking, hey, I want to stay balanced, and maybe even the word balanced has probably gained new meaning to you as you've gone through the experience. But how do you guys look at that? And again, you know, many of you have, or all of you have either worked at startups or startups and companies that have the throttle just, you know, jammed at maximum. How have you evolved your theory of balance, and how do you achieve it today?
I think it's obsession. I say that kind of joking, but I've never lived a balanced life. Just like never. When I was in college, I used to pull 2 all-nighters a week. I have been quoted on, you know, Nova saying that I never sleep, and I just don't. You know, there's this traditional sense of balance that's like, you spend a certain amount of time at work, and then you go do the things that you think are fun.
Right. And
I think that's absurd, because if you're spending all this time doing something you don't love at work, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? You know, that's 8 or 10 or in some people's cases 15 hours a day that you don't love. And on the other side, if you love what you're doing at work and you take that passion and you leave energized, you can think of balance in a totally different way, right? If I'm doing my hobby for work, you know, yes, I still need to be fit. Yes, I still need love in my life. I still need friends, but I don't need to go home and read about the things that I would love to do.
Right.
And I don't go home feeling exhausted at the end of the day. and that's a really powerful thing. So do what you love.
So if you're doing what you love, and I'm 100% philosophically aligned with you on it. How do you guys find perspective? Because I can go to work and work crazy hours all year long, but at some point, like I stare at myself and I realize I've lost perspective. Like for me, I have to leave for a while. Like for me, it takes me 5 days to unplug, just because the first 4 days, it's still the stream is running. But like, do you have things that give you perspective while you still love what you do, that help you, almost give you creative juice or a boost or something, so that when you come back in, you love what you do, but you got this new angle or this new or a refresh, almost like I don't know what the word I'm struggling to find here, but that perspective that something else gives you that helps you almost love it even more, or lets you remember why you love it when, the shit hits the fan?
So perspective. I think, getting sleep is, I just talked about how I don't sleep, but when I do eventually get 6 hours of sleep in a night, it's like a whole new thing. And I know for these guys, sleep is really key to maintaining mental stability and just not wanting to kill the people you're working with. So that's one thing. But also, breaks are really healthy. Taking time, whether that's a conference that you go to and it's just a totally different setting, or something that we do pretty often is we'll take a couple of days, and we don't plan these out. We do them usually when it's clear there's an issue we need to resolve. But we'll take a couple days off site and just get away from the day to day. That's super helpful. And then everybody takes a few days off and goes and relaxes, and that's very helpful.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we'll include information on how folks can reach out to you if they have any other questions or want to meet you, because you guys are awesome. Have a good one.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Into the Forge. If you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me via the email address podcast@lemnos.vc, lemnos.vc. This is the last episode for Season 2, but we'll be back in May with new founders and some exciting enhancements. Stay tuned.